Welcome back into, well, not welcome back in. Welcome into our overtime segment. See, the last 20 seconds before we start the overtime segment, we're always talking about something else. Like Bob was the one who taught his kids to cuss. That's what we were discussing. Hope you didn't mind that getting out there. So that throws me right when we go into this. So anyway, welcome into our overtime edition here on SportsSource.tv. This segment brought to you by Smokin' Joe's and Paper Mill, on Paper Mill, Smokin' Joe's in Alcoa. For the best selection of cigars, high-quality cigars for the best prices, Smokin' Joe's at those two locations. There are other Smokin' Joe's in the area with that name. Paper Mill and Alcoa are the company we're talking about. That's where you're going to get Mike Hicks and his crew. That's where you're going to get great deals, great smokes. Smokin' Joe's, Alcoa, Paper Mill. Remember. All right. Guys, I want to wrap up Tennessee's men's basketball season. Bob Hodge, Mark Pancratz, Isaiah Victor didn't stay. Chuck Cavaliers, Isaiah's on his way back to Clarksville. He took the last train to Clarksville. Let's start with a recruiting note, Mark. Right now, Tobias Harris, Jordan McRae, Josh Richardson is tearing it up, and C.J. Watson are all on NBA rosters. Jarnell Stokes is in the D-League, but a lot of people expect him to be back in the NBA at some point, kind of the way McRae had to work his way up. How big of a benefit is that on the recruiting trail to say, look, you got more I mean, there were guys, for decades you had Allen Houston. Yeah. Period. Done. That's all you had. Now you got 4 or 5 guys in there. They're making some noise, as Richardson has recently. How big of a help is that? And is that help offset by the fact that it wasn't Rick Barnes who coached them there?
Yeah, I was going to say I think it helps Bruce Pearl and Conzo Martin more than it really helps Rick Barnes because they recruited those guys. Coach Barnes is using guys that he recruited at Texas that are in the league, and he helped grow and mature and get into the NBA. NBA is a big thing. That's what all parents and kids want to hear. But I don't think the former Vols success really has a big impact on what Coach Barnes and this staff is able to recruit other than their Texas guys. Helps
more if those guys start coming back, doing a little bit more. You see so much of the VFL stuff in football. If you have more of that involvement, I suppose, on campus from the basketball VFL.
And you have some of that. I mean, Josh, Jordan, Tobias, CJ, they are big VFL type guys, but they're not the level of a Peyton Manning where they have that many eyes on them outside of purebred Tennessee fans.
Well, and that's another thing. Let's go back to one. If you didn't see my 7th block of today's show where I talked about Peyton Manning and what was so special, I did want to throw out something. We didn't have time. But one thing I did want to throw out about Peyton Manning, why he was so special as a marketer, not only did you have people paying him as a pitch man, but you'll never see that combination again because he was an all-time great at the quarterback position. So you had an ambassador like nobody's business who happens to be one of the nation's highest paid pitchmen who is an all-time great at the number 1 position in football. The free publicity that Tennessee got, I mean, more so than his impact on the field at Tennessee. The last 18 years of Manning selling the program with his platform, I don't know of another school that can match that. Anyway, I don't know anybody that can match that. So anyway, that neither here nor there. The fact you mentioned Manning made me go back and remember, that's what I was going to say in segment 7 if we'd had more time. Now back to basketball. Richardson, incredible story. Tearing it up right now. Chris Bosh put out a tweet about him this week about how he's tearing it up. I think he outscored the Bulls in a quarter by himself the other night. This is a guy, nobody wanted him, so he was going to Missouri State with Conzo Martin. Conzo Martin brings him to Tennessee. Nobody here wants him, some dud from Missouri State. He continues to improve and improve and improve, finishes up under Donnie Tyndall, looks great, makes to the NBA and just fights his way up. You've been around the kid. Your thoughts on Josh Richardson and his story in terms of Vol fans connecting with somebody. And then for some reason, fans connect with some players more than others. To me, like a Chris Lofton, because he was such a great player and battled cancer, people lock on Dane Bradshaw because he was just a glue guy. Mm-hmm. Josh Richardson is a guy I think needs even more love.
And it's also, there were less eyes on Josh, less eyes on Armani because the team wasn't as successful. I mean, we think about the Loftons, the Bradshaws, they have so much love for them because everybody was watching the success. But his comments after that performance against the Bulls the other night, where he was asked, how many shots are you getting up? How much? He said, well, some guys get to the NBA and they just feel like, well, I've made it. I'm good. I'm making that paycheck. He's spending hours in the gym every day getting hundreds and hundreds of shots. I mean, who would have thought if you could have saw Josh as a freshman and be able to make 6 threes in an NBA game or 5 threes, whatever that number was, no one would have thought he would ever be able to do that. And it talks about his growth and maturation. But again, back to the recruiting side of a 3-star guy. It's not all about the stars. You got to find that right fit. Josh Richardson is a perfect example of the perfect fit from Cuonzo Martin's staff. Defensive-minded guy. Donnie Tyndall gets a lot of credit for that because without Donnie Tyndall putting him and forcing him into the point guard position, I argue he wouldn't get drafted because he hadn't shown that he could handle the basketball. So it's a great story. It's going to be absurd the amount of money that kid's going to make with this next contract. It's exciting to see a lot of these guys have success.
Good for him. All right. Tennessee has a Nashville game lined up next year against Gonzaga. They are talking about possible neutral site game, more in Nashville, perhaps one in Washington, D.C., perhaps one in Charlotte in the years ahead. And I'll start with you, and I'll get you to comment on this. From a recruiting standpoint, John Calipari really kicked this thing into hyperdrive. He's the one that said, well, Kentucky is a national program, so we're going to play all over the place. You're seeing more and more of it. Teams get money to go play these things. You're getting incredible exposure. From a recruiting standpoint, you almost have to do it, don't you?
You do, and it's good for TV, it's good for the fan base, good for recruiting, all those things. The hard part is your core fan base gives up a really good game.
Yep.
That's the hard part to say, well, gosh, we could have North Carolina come here instead of playing North Carolina in Charlotte. So that's the tough part about it. But I think from a program's perspective, from a national brand, it's the right thing to do.
Chuck and Bob, fans, you know the business of it. It's good business to do this. Fan base, though, Mark threw back one of the drawbacks. You want to see the best games in Knoxville. Your thoughts on it as a fan?
I think as a fan, yeah, you want to see the best games in Knoxville. I think as a fan of a team that if you're improving, if your curve is going up, the neutral site games can really help you, and I think they're a great idea. If you're stuck at being a sub 500 team and you're out and you're playing neutral site games, I don't know if it helps you that much, because if people are seeing you lose, and more recruits are seeing you lose, so I think it kind of depends on where you are on the spectrum. And I think Tennessee with Rick Barnes, they finished season momentum. Yeah. They're kind of going up, so I think it is a good idea.
And I would look at it. I mean, if it's a choice of playing North Carolina and Charlotte or not at all, then I would say we'll play them in Charlotte, and maybe that'll lead to a home and home. And look at it now, the NCAA tournament starting. That may give you the chance to get a quality win. And you see that on these teams' resumes. Quality win, bad losses. That gives you a chance to get something that's going to help you get in the tournament down the road.
And as a fan, I think you would rather see a good team played at a neutral site than being going over to Thompson Bowling to see North Dakota State. No offense to North Dakota State. I would think you would rather see them play better teams somewhere else than the lesser teams at home.
Quick. Well, the argument to that is, from a coach's perspective, look at Andy Kennedy, look at Frank Martin. You got to win games because that's my paycheck. Because if I lose too many, I don't care if I'm losing versus North Carolina, they're a really good team. But if I'm going to beat North Dakota State, that's that chalk in the left column, what ultimately is going to help me keep my job.
It might have saved Frank Martin's job this year if he doesn't make a tournament in year 3.
Well, they may not.
They may not. They're not guaranteed. I know that. But here's the thing: they got a much better shot now because they've started red hot by playing no one. You take away those. When they win to open the season, 10 games, 11 straight.
I think they're 13-0.
13-0. Okay, take the 13 wins off that team, split it in half, and tell me they're not in the tournament. And where's he sitting? So, yeah, I agree with Mark. I think from a coaching standpoint, you do have to play some of the duds to keep your number. Now, what's interesting is Rick Barnes, though, is going to push again at the SEC meetings when the coaches get together for better scheduling. And you've got some guys that are just going to always bend that. If it benefits them, if they're in trouble, to heck with helping your RPI, I'm going to save my butt.
Yeah, and Coach Barnes is already saying, hey, next year we open here against Chattanooga, correct? We're going to play North Carolina. After Chattanooga, we go to Maui. Who are we going to be playing there? He's already pumping that up, and he does want more teams doing that, because if the SEC just gets 2 teams in the NCAA tournament and a lot
it's
of
a bad conference
in
terms of
South
basketball.
Carolina,
So it's a bad
schedule.
It's rare when it's a good basketball conference. It's been bad more than it's been good in recent years. And you also have to wonder about the future of the Big 12 SEC Challenge, because the Big 12 isn't getting a whole lot out of that deal. Great, we get to help our RPI by playing Auburn, terrific.
Well, they do get they do get recruiting because they do. There are some hotbeds of recruiting in the Southeast, and they can come in and pluck some of them. The other side of it, from a coaching,
let's see if that's still around in a couple of years. Go ahead.
The other side, from the coaching perspective of it, it's very easy for Calipari and Coach Barnes to say play harder schedules because they've made a heck of a lot of money coaching this game.
Yeah.
Whereas these other coaches that are still trying to make it and have a long tenure, a 17-year career at Texas, and do what Calipari's done. It's a lot harder for them to say, well, I'm going to go schedule really tough because if I have 3 years of not making the NCAA tournament, I'm canned and I'm going back to busting all around in mid-major land.
Okay, good deal. I want to get to the last bit here. It's going to make Mark mad. November to February, basketball. Yawn. March, hooray! Everything goes nuts in March. Tennessee had more excitement in a 3-day run than they did over several periods of weeks during the regular season. There have been some who've said, make basketball a one-semester sport. That is never going to happen. In fact, you will never see the sport shortened at all because teams want the revenue of games on campus. If anything, you'll see it pushed back into earlier November and games added. That said, could you at least push the start of the season to December 1st? What if you knocked out the Thanksgiving and November games? Because let's face it, you're playing so many games now. Even though it's not going to happen, theoretically, how would you feel about shortening the season a little bit? Because March already makes it king. You watch a November game, most of the time, it doesn't matter. You get hot in March at the right time, that matters. Thoughts on shortening the season? You hate it?
And I don't give November I don't give it the yawn. I don't give November through February a yawn. I mean, I've seen a lot of good games during that time. I think it's a perfect transition for when football's ending.
Sure.
You think Kentucky wants to end?
Home team wins.
Shorten the season.
Home team wins 75% of the time. Yeah, it's really exciting.
No,
I mean, to go into a game and know, hey, we're on the road. We can't win. That's fascinating. I'm playing devil's advocate to get you.
I think
your
your compromise though is a good one. December
push it 2
1st,
weeks.
and here's the reason why. It is a yawn around here, Chuck, depending on how good football is. If football's good, there's nobody cares except the hardcore.
But you got to
basketball
broaden the
fans.
horizon than just Knoxville, Tennessee on this. I mean, you're
Okay.
talking about shortening for all of college
Yeah,
basketball.
you think Alabama?
Go to
You think
most
they were really?
schools, though, around the South, and it's football.
I'm
It's football.
Well, you got to broaden your horizon more than just the South.
Okay, let's go to the South.
Okay, well, let's just talk. In Creighton, they really love basketball more than football at Creighton. All right.
Well, in where I grew up right outside Chicago, Illinois, and that's where basketball is king.
Yep.
I mean, that's year round. That's what they're talking about. To your point, yeah, you can't. There are a lot of good games, and if we were winning basketball, I remember when we were winning and we were making runs. Thompson Bowen was electric. You couldn't get a ticket. You were paying for tickets, and it didn't matter what time of year it was. So yeah, we've had some down years in here, and we've talked about it. There's times when even in this January, I was like, man, I'm not really excited to watch this game. But I think from the holistic view, you can't shorten the season. And again, granted, I'm a basketball guy, but I wouldn't shorten the season because I think there's a lot of value in those early games.
They never will shorten it. That'll never happen.
Right, but
Just for
December
money.
1st is a heck of a good compromise.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think most places, here, I shouldn't say most places, half the places are paying attention to college football through the end of November, more so than they are college basketball. Now, they're ACC, the Northeast, where you don't have college football, Chicago, basketball. Okay, that's great. But college football is the number one sport in terms of TV ratings, in terms of money, in terms of what's coming in. So I just think push it back 2 weeks, start it in December. That way you're not having to sit there and watch Tennessee play East Oxnard State to start the season. That gets another reason it won't happen. Coaches want to play East Oxnard State to save their butts. But to me, I think you could push it back a couple of weeks because, again, you've just seen it. And people say this about football. If you expand the playoffs, it'll lead into the regular season. It won't because football only has 12 games. It's 1 game a week. Basketball, I think, March so trumps everything else because you play 40 stinking games, or 32 now, 32, 33 games. Then with the tournaments, you play 40. I think it's easier for March just to kind of cancel out all the stuff that happened because you're playing every other night, it seems. So, anyway, you guys disagree. Bob and I agree, which means Bob and I win. And I was taking that to extreme just to
Yeah.
make a point. But anyway, all right, we will see you next week. Have a safe and happy St. Patrick's Day. We will see you next Sunday, 11 a.m., WATE 6, the Sports Source. Mark Pancratz, thanks for great coverage all basketball season, even during some of those blah months. I appreciate you joining us all year. Mark sent me a note yesterday. He said, now, this is the last week until the next controversy or the next tragedy. So, yes, keep your phone handy, because at Tennessee we never completely clear the clouds. But the next time something pops up, we'll bring you in good or bad. Mark Pancratz, thank you very much. Thanks to Chuck. Thanks to Bob. Thanks to you. See you next week, Sunday, 11 WATE 6.